Get this started recording. So today's topic is focused on introducing systems thinking, and this effort overall, Wisconsin Water Thinkers Network webinar series, and specifically this topic on intro to systems thinking, is supported through ThinkWater, which has funding from USDA, and we also have a small WEEB grant right now through the Wisconsin Environmental Education Foundation to support this work. My goal for the webinar today is to, again, kind of introduce you to some of the key ideas of systems thinking, show you some kind of basic applications, and do that in about 40 minutes. We'll have some time for conversation, question and answer at the end of that, and given that time, it really is just an introduction to get folks started and see where you might be able to go with it. So again, thank you for being here. If you could mute while you're listening in, that would be great, and then you can join back in talking after I present here. We'll just minimize the audio sounds going on. All right, so systems thinking. And when I think about systems thinking, I came to this work as an educator kind of from a realization that I really had minimal idea what I was talking about when I asked people to think about things. And found this work of ThinkWater and Cabrera's, Derek Cabrera, who's at Cornell, basically developed the framework and the theory behind the framework for all the work that we're doing. But as I see it, systems thinking is really useful in four general ways. One, to improve our own thinking using DSRP and metacognition. I'll tell you what all these acronyms are a little bit later on. It's also really helpful to help in improving education and outreach. Basically, if you understand how people think, you can better engage them and help them to develop their own knowledge. It's also really interesting and applicable at a community or an organizational level of any sort, and I'll talk a little bit about how that plays out in this webinar. And then we can really get a deeper understanding of complex issues by using systems thinking as well. And I'll touch on all of these to some extent, particularly 1 through 3 today. So when I talk about systems thinking, when we talk about systems thinking within ThinkWater, we're combining kind of two fields of knowledge. The first one being an understanding of how systems work, which we can think of as just the basic system science, and then also understanding of how we think as individuals, the field that we call cognition. A lot of what you hear about as systems thinking really focuses kind of on the system side of things without integrating in the cognitive science piece. So one of the key things that we get out of this understanding both systems and thinking is that, like most natural systems, our thinking and our brain works as a complex adaptive system. And this is how almost all of nature works, right? There are all kinds of complex adaptive systems, from individuals being organisms to large groups of people and ecosystems and kind of out and beyond. And when we talk about complex adaptive systems, what we're talking about are individuals acting in some way, those being autonomous agents. So again, those could be people or animals as an individual doing their thing. This could also be, within our brain, kind of the individual steps that we perform as part of the thinking process. And those individuals functioning together, following simple rules, lead to an emergent complexity within the group. So we talk about that as self-organization, variety of adaptive behaviors. In our case, when we're thinking about thinking, that emergent complexity is the thinking process itself. And we've all seen examples of these complex adaptive systems. So you've seen these amazing starling murmurations, schools of fish, but also other examples are the human wave in a stadium, and on, thinking, of course. And what's interesting about these complex adaptive systems is that for quite a while, some people thought that there had to be leaders to make all these things happen. We know that that's, not really the case. All of these are simply individuals acting kind of on their own motivations and following some simple rules. So in the case of the human wave, the simple rules of doing a wave are you stand up when the person next to you stands up, you put your hands in the air, and then you sit down when you're done, right? And that creates this kind of crazy, amazing behavior. For starlings and fish, it has to do with the spacing between them and moving in the same direction each of them moves. So the important point is that we know that these complex adaptive systems function by simple rules, and that if we understand thinking as a complex adaptive system, we can look for the simple rules that underlie our thinking. So I want to spend a little bit of time kind of diving into that, and I'm going to talk about this in kind of 3 things that we all can do as systems thinkers. And I'll kind of go through these each stepwise, and then I'll have some, after these, we'll kind of apply these to a couple of different situations. So this is a handout that goes over these 3 things. This is available on the ThinkWater website, and I'll show you where all those resources are. But you can get into more details here, but I'm going to walk through each of these pieces of being metacognitive using the systems thinking building blocks, or thought of another way, the simple rules that underlie thinking, and then kind of getting more in depth with those. So the first thing that we can do as systems thinkers is to be, excuse me, metacognitive, and that simply means that we are able to step back from our thinking to think about how we're thinking about things, right? Most of what we do on a daily basis is simply reacting to the things that are in front of us. We are amazing, smart animals. Our brains are always working. We're always thinking. But rarely do we take the time to actually think about how we're kind of taking in information and processing it. So the key to kind of understanding is that we are always thinking. Our thinking is shaped by the patterns and underlying structures and ultimately the mental models that we already hold in our head. Some of those patterns, you could think about are just the typical ways that things happen. We understand that we observe patterns, understand they fit into those. Underlying structures could be anything from, they influence how we receive information because of how things are marketed, how things are kind of promoted to us, the existing kind of understanding that we have in our brain basically influence the information that we're taking in. And underlying all of those are the mental models that we hold. And these mental models are incredibly powerful in shaping how we understand the world. And in fact, they are kind of how we understand the world. One way to think about this is if I say dog to you, you all immediately have an understanding of what a dog is. I didn't have to describe that dog to you. You didn't have to go out and find a dog and examine its parts and figure out what that thing was. And that is because your brain had already built a mental model of what a dog is. And this is true for basically all of the information that we act within the world. And that's because the world's so complex, there's so much information that our brain can't continuously relearn everything, take in all the information, analyze it, and make new meaning out of that. So we've developed mental models as a coping strategy, really, to deal with all that information. So mental models are incredibly important. This is a good way to understand mental models. The really important thing to understand as we become more metacognitive is that we don't have the real world in our head, right? So when I said dog, you recognize that there actually isn't a dog in your head. You have an understanding or an approximation of a dog in your head, but not the actual dog. And this is true of everything that we understand, right? It's not the real world in our head. It's a representation of that. And as we begin to understand that, we can intervene in that process and help ourselves and help others develop mental models that are better approximations of the real world. So if we go back to this dog example, you know, if your mental model of a dog is something that's, you know, fuzzy and furry and very friendly, that might be a good mental model, and it's one that I held, you know, for quite a bit of my early life. But that mental model can fall apart if you run into a dog who's aggressive and you go up to it while it's growling and try and pet it. You soon get feedback that your mental model of the world isn't quite accurate. So I have a handful of stitch scars because my mental model of a dog wasn't a great approximation of the real world. And if we're open to that feedback and adjusting our mental models, then we don't have to relearn that each time. I've only been bitten by a dog once. And this is true for everything in the world. And if you think of education at a very basic level, what education is kind of a shortcut to helping people to develop mental models that are better approximations of the real world. All right, so this is a great little video that demonstrates the power of mental models. This is called Wildebeest Mental Models. It's just about a minute long, so we'll just take a minute to watch this. All right, so learning just happened there, right? So, and you know, again, in reality, this is how we kind of interact with the world. You know, we're trying to figure out the mental models that are the best approximations of the real world. The second wildebeest here, you'll note that he changed his mental model of what that thing was from a crocodile to a log. That is learning. That's what we call learning. And that second wildebeest had a choice as the third wildebeest came up, who had a, you know, inaccurate mental model of the world. He kind of has the choice to either share his learning, which we would call education, or to let that wildebeest experience the world on his own and see if his mental model is right. So hopefully he chose education. But these mental models are, you know, incredibly powerful. They change through time, both at the individual level and at the societal level. So these just show a couple of societal level mental models. You recognize this one as a mental model of solar system, and you know we're at this one right now. Actually, we can tweak that a little bit to understand that it's not just kind of a flat, static, three-dimensional piece, but it's actually shooting through space in time. So we're actually moving in spirals because of that. But it's a much better representation than our early mental models. You'll recognize these. Both of these are Barbie dolls, but the Barbie on the right has influenced girls' self-perception for a few generations now. But that represents a mental model, someone's mental model of what females were supposed to look like. That was a designer and a manufacturer, right? That thought that women, females were supposed to look like that. The Barbie on the left is a new mental model. It's actually crowdsourced, kind of a composite of how women actually look, and this one's actually anatomically possible. So these mental models, come into play in lots of settings and have lots of ramifications for how we interact in the world. So Derek Cabrera likes to say that this statement is kind of a PhD boiled down to one sentence, PhD in systems thinking. And that is essentially that we get in lots of problems when our mental models don't match the real world, or specifically wicked problems result from the mismatch between how the real world systems work and how we think they work. And you can chew on that for a while, but I would challenge you to find a situation where that's not true. Pretty much all of the problems we run into is because we've understood the world in kind of a weird, crazy way, and not based on the real world itself. So the question becomes, if mental models are so important, which they are, how is it that those mental models are developed? We develop mental models basically through knowledge, which is gained through experience in the world, right? Experience and learning. One of the most important distinctions that we make is understanding that knowledge is not equal to information, but knowledge is equal to information times thinking. And there's been a lot of kind of discussion about, does education have an impact on people's behaviors or not? And the statement's been made, knowledge doesn't change people's behavior. I would argue against that and say that information doesn't change people's behaviors. Knowledge actually does, because knowledge helps us to build mental models, which are how we interact with the world. And you can think of this, that if you walk in front of a moving bus, you're going to die most likely. That knowledge directly influences how you interact with that bus. Of course, it gets more complicated that you can use the smoking example, and even if we have a knowledge about the challenges and health consequences of smoking, some people still do that. And that's because those ramifications are a bit further down the road and there are other things that influence, but that doesn't diminish the importance of knowledge and our mental models in determining how we interact in the world. So we're going to focus on this thinking piece a little bit. If knowledge is equal to information times thinking, understanding thinking is a key to educating other people and helping them to develop that are better representations of reality. The information piece we're all really good at. There's information everywhere. We're in information overload. Our programs are generally very good about providing information. We need to focus more on how do we develop the thinking skills of those that we want. So someone still is not muted. We're getting some background noise, so if you could check on that, that would be great. Thank you. So the second thing that we can do as systems thinkers is use these simple rules that underlie how we think. And we call these ESRP, which stands for Distinction, Systems, Relationships, and Perspectives. And I'll go through each of these in a little bit of detail. But again, these are the simple ways in which our brains take information and build knowledge, essentially. We structure that information to build knowledge. The distinctions rule basically says any ideas distinguished from something else. Systems rule is that any idea or thing, it can both be split into parts or understood as a larger system. Relationship rules that anything or idea can relate to other ideas. And perspective rules that everything that is viewed from a specific point, and that point influences how that thing is seen. So I'll walk through each of these. So we talk about making distinctions as identifying an identity and an other. So a few examples of these just to kind of help you understand this a little bit more. You all recognize these folks most likely, and this is from a commercial in which a specific company was trying to make a distinction between their computer and all the other computers that exist out there, right? So when they if they were effective, you understood their product as something that was different than everything else that was out there. Distinctions are basically what our senses do. All of our senses are making distinctions between other things out in the world, right? So a taste is a specific thing. A thing that we hear, a signal, is distinguished from just background noise, and so on. These guys are all individuals. We recognize them as being distinct individuals. This idea of distinctions isn't just what happens in our brain, it's what happens in nature too. But even if we can't identify specifically which bear is which, I couldn't tell you too many of the distinguishing characteristics here. We recognize that they're individuals and we make a distinction between them. And these distinctions can be really powerful. So here's an example of same situation, but two very different distinctions made on this situation. So the first one, the headline is "A gunman's father talks to CNN." The bottom one, "A madman's father talks to CNN." Very simple and almost subtle distinction that's made, but that completely changes how we understand that situation and potentially how we react in that situation and how we treat that person. The first one being about kind of a gun, and the second one being about mental disease. So we make these distinctions continuously and often don't even think about them. This one's a little bit more comical distinction that we can make. If you're worried about bear attacks and you wanted to make a distinction of where you have to worry about that in the solar system, there's a very small area that we would distinguish as having a risk of bear attacks. Again, comical approach to this. This one also seems a little bit comical to begin with until you realize these distinctions play into our everyday lives. All of these things that we care about and groups that we're part of tend to end up on this left side of, the places we care about, the people we care about, who's smart and who's good, versus the out groups tend to be over on the right side. And we call these people on the right side, people like, or terms like terrorists or immigrants or the opposite political party or a whole host of things. But that process is about making distinctions. So distinctions are a way that we make sense of the information that we have. So the second rule is organizing systems, recognizing parts and wholes. Sometimes there's an argument which has to do with what's a better way to understand something, by its parts or by the whole thing. And there's a whole kind of field called holism that looks at understanding the whole as a way to better understand something. We let the splitters versus lumpers debate has raged on forever. We like to say actually neither is the best way, and both are the best way to understand something. So we say it's not really about splitters or lumpers, but it's about the two of them together that we call splumpers. And you can think of this from a car standpoint. Car is obviously a whole unto itself that's made up of lots of parts. Those parts are pretty important. If you think only the whole is important, try driving for a little while with one flat tire or a broken transmission or whatever it might be. But that's not the entire understanding of a car either, because a car is a whole unto itself, but it's also part of larger systems. So a car is part of a transportation system, economic system, and beyond. So beginning to identify parts and wholes is an important part of the metacognitive process. Again, we recognize these pretty readily. If we say the United States, we recognize that that's a whole thing, but it's also made up of parts. We can break those parts down, further and further. We can talk about states, we can talk about counties, we can talk about cities and on down to individuals and beyond. Understanding of part whole comes into play in lots of ways, but I'll focus on one of them given the time of year that we're at right now. Gerrymandering has a wonderful tradition in the United States that goes back hundreds of years. But gerrymandering is essentially a really in-depth understanding of part-whole relationships. So if you take a whole population that's represented by this red and blue here, and try to ignore the colors, but if we say, out of a whole population, we can understand, what people's voting preferences are. But as a whole, we don't tend to vote as a whole. We vote in precincts or wards or whatever it might be in your community. So if you are at a state level, you can begin to understand the whole broken down in parts in different ways. So if we, break this whole down into parts this way, you see that blue, wins, and we would call that a victory. We could break them down a different way, and we'd see that blue wins kind of unanimously across districts. And then we can completely change the election by breaking them down a completely different way, which is the gerrymandering process. And that understanding of how do we manipulate parts of a whole obviously has major ramifications for politics, but also lots of other things as well. The third rule is about relationships and understanding that as we build understanding of the relationships between ideas, these could be action, reaction, or a whole number of relationships, we can develop a deeper understanding of this. Google is like the most amazing thing at building relationships right now, right? So if I say lobster dog, you may have some idea of how to build a connection between those two distinct ideas. Lobster and dog are both distinctions that we can make. But Google would tell us that the relationship is something like this. And that these relationships create kind of unique, interesting, new ideas, right? I'd never really thought of a lobster dog like that before. Some of you who know about or worked on the old internet know that information on the internet wasn't based on relationships, it was based on categories. And so if you followed a trail down something to get to some topic, you may end up where you wanted to. You may also end up in a whole different crazy space. But the internet now is all based on relationships and being able to connect kind of any two disparate ideas like dogs and lobsters. But these relationships we do on, again, a daily basis in lots of ways. A couple of examples. Innovations in scientific fields come basically between understanding relationships between disciplines. So relationship between biology and chemistry is biochemistry. We get other innovations. As I was growing up in Antigo, we never had a gas mart. We either went to the gas station or we went to the grocery store. But some enterprising person along the way said, there's kind of an interesting relationship there. Why don't we create a place where you can do both? And developed what is very common now. The lady on the left is wearing what's called a sweaterall. That's the relationship between a sweater and overalls. Again, innovations happen from there. I'm not sure what good that one is, but maybe it's useful. Some relationships aren't quite as recognizable. This one I don't think we'd see in Wisconsin, but somehow this person, Mr. or Mrs. DeHart, understood that there was some relationship between Bible and a tire and created this store where you could get both of those. So these are kind of goofy examples, but again, the metacognitive process is to recognize relationships between ideas and to build knowledge. And the final rule is taking perspective and recognizing that anything that is viewed from a specific point, and that point determines, what's seen. So this guy, some of you may or may not know that snail crime has been pretty bad. Just the other day, just outside my backyard, this guy was gliding down a log and got attacked by 3 turtles. Got beat up pretty bad. Police showed up. And I said, "Snail, like what happened to you?" And he said, "I have no idea. Things happened so fast. I couldn't tell who it was or what it was. Next thing I was cruising along. Next thing I know, I was just beaten up and on the ground." So that's a good joke. But the most important point about this is that as we look at this guy and we look at turtles, we see, two groups of animals that are pretty slow. From the point of view of a snail, though, turtles are a completely different class, right? They're a speedy critter that we wouldn't necessarily think of from our perspective. Here's another one about perspective. You'll find us, somewhere up in here on this cover of the New Yorker. This is the view of the United States from New York City. Everything that's important happens in the foreground here. Then there's the Hudson River, and then all of the rest of the United States out to the Pacific Ocean as this barren wasteland. I think our view of the United States and New York City is a little bit different than theirs. But the important kind of understanding is that when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change, right? So from any point, something may look like something, but another point, it's going to look different. So those are the 4 rules, DSRP. They are incredibly simple and incredibly profound. One of the most challenging kind of pieces of beginning learning about this is understanding that their simplicity kind of belies how profound that they are, and beginning to use these is just the next step in being a systems thinker. And we talk about this in beginning to apply DSRP across everything that we do. We say that it's content agnostic. We happen to apply it to water, but can be applied to any topic really. And then we can think about applying these in ways that can lead to deeper understanding of things. So it's not just about kind of the stepwise process of DSR and P, and it's not about putting them in 4 different buckets of DSR or P, but it's about doing all of these things together and beginning to apply them and getting better and better at how we understand things and how we build knowledge by intervening in that process of thinking. All right, so that's a little bit of the background. I want to talk about a couple of applications related to this, but just to wrap up there again, like with all complex adaptive systems, often there are simple rules that underlie those systems, and DSRP is that set of simple rules that underlie how we think. So a couple of direct applications. How does this apply to our worlds in community water engagement? So the first one is helping to design educational programs. Actually, the first one is just using it in developing our own thinking. Second one you could think of as education programs. I'm just going to do a real quick overview of this so we have time for questions, but the MAC process stands for Map, Activate, and Check, and it is a really rich, powerful curriculum and communication design tool that basically walks through a process of identifying what you would like someone to know and understand, mapping that out using DSRP, finding a way to activate that knowledge in someone, and I'll show you another piece of this in a second, and then checking to see if that mental model has been constructed or not, and then adjusting the activation to better build that mental model in people. Again, this is based on utilizing DSRP, understanding of how people think, and understanding that building knowledge is not just about information, but it's about information times thinking. I want to focus a little bit on this activation piece. Also note that this is a handout that you can access from the ThinkWater website. Activation basically runs on a continuum. Starts with kind of low-intensive, low-impact ways to get people to understand something. These are things like having people tell you, what they already know, utilizing metaphors and analogies, which can be powerful, but are kind of most effective with simple concepts. And they progress up to highly engaged, highly experiential type of activities to immerse people in an experience that help them to develop new mental models. And so we can use this both in communication and in education to continuously progress up the continuum. So if we're doing a lot of, just talking to people, even at this level of presentations, we can begin to think about, well, how can we build in metaphors and analogies into our programming? How can we use visualizations to help to do that? And then are there ways to get more tactile and experiential type activities built into our programming? I want to show you just real quick an example of what this looks like. So this is the MetaMap software. This is a free tool available through ThinkWater. You can sign up to it or sign up for it. You can see the address up here, metamap.me. This is the map model, map, activate, check. And I'm just going to show you a pretty simple program, that I built. This one was specifically for students, but I've done this, for adult programs as well. So the map, what do I want students to understand? That wetlands are biodiversity hotspots. I can begin to map out what does that mean. These are all distinct ideas that are parts of this idea of wetlands being biodiversity hotspots. I want them to understand what wetlands are and what makes a wetland, which are these three key ideas that they have: wetland soils, there's water, and wetland vegetation. And then I think about, how do I actually activate those ideas? So I begin to build the relationships between those kind of concepts and ways of thinking about something with some specific activities. So this one was a wetlands bioblitz. Lay that out and then think about, how is it that I can check these things? And I'm wanting to check both the content, their knowledge of something, of the content that I'm interested in them knowing, and also their thinking process, so I can actually have them lay out their thinking and understanding of DSRP of these topics in a variety of ways. So that's a very powerful tool. Again, real brief kind of overview of that to get you started, but these are, again, available on the website. And then the last one I'm going to mention before I wrap up here, I talked about this on the last or the first webinar, which was the last webinar, which is how we use DSRP in organizational development. We call that VMCL, developing a vision, mission, culture, and learning. And we did that within Wisconsin Water Thinkers Network. But you see the application of DSRP here, basically, of distinct ideas, relationships between ideas, to build this kind of organizational basis for an adaptive organization. So you could refer back to the previous webinar to get some more details on that. And this is also a handout that you can access. So with that brief introduction, usually I do this in 3 hours or something. Hopefully you get a sense of some of the key ideas with systems thinking. Again, incredibly powerful, but often not realized because of how simple it is, but it's something you just begin to apply, and ThinkWater and the resources that we have can help you to get started with that. So you see the ThinkWater website here and Facebook page. That's a place where we have conversations about systems thinking. Resources are posted. So with that, I would be happy to take questions. So feel free to type those in, or you can just join in via audio too. So Victoria has a question. So the next webinar topic, thanks for that lead in. Next webinar topic is on social science. That's going to be November 30th. Again, these are last Wednesday. Topic is using social science to inform water action, and that's going to be offered by Aaron Thompson and Deidre Paroff. Aaron's with Extension and UW-Stevens Point, and Deidre's with Wisconsin Sea Grant. So that will be a good topic to check back in too. Are you going to go more in depth with DSRP or metamaps? I can't at this point, but I'm happy to do that with anyone. Actually, we have an online course that's coming out this fall yet, and that will give you way more in depth. That'll be about a 3-hour course that will get you more engaged in those. We're also offering workshops throughout Wisconsin in which you can participate in those. Again, generally I aim for about 4 hours to kind of get into this topic. This gives you kind of a taste of what that might look like. But there are lots of ways to learn more about how these get applied. But what I'd encourage you to do is just start using them. On the WGEO group, and also post these on the Facebook page, and if you want to email me directly, you can do that too if you're not on either of those. I'll put my email address in here. We have a set of analytical questions using DSRP, and those are pretty good places to start to just begin to look at any topic, begin asking some of those questions about distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspective that will begin to give you an idea of how these might play into helping you to think differently or deeper about those. So do that. Online course is just going to be offered for free. It's you can take it whenever, and the best way to find out about that is to be part of the Wisconsin Water Thinkers Network or on the ThinkWater Facebook page that will be announced. Or if you're, don't want to make sure you don't miss that, you can email me, and I will send it directly to you when it comes out. We're basically looking at how we can effectively develop and deepen systems thinking skills in kind of the shortest amount of time possible. So we're doing some research as part of that to see how effective people are able to pick up on some of these skills. The meta mapping is built into that course, so you get some practice using meta mapping and all of the rest of the tools and resources that we have within ThinkWater. So I expect that will be out by the end of the year. That's the plan. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? Chime into. I think I got all of those. If anybody's interested in this presentation specifically, I can share some of it. It's not for kind of representation. All of this is essentially the intellectual property of Derek Cabrera, but you can use it as a reference point. I'm happy to share it with you that way. If you want to use anything in a presentation, I can work with you to do that, but just let me know if you want to see this. As I mentioned, this was recorded. It'll be posted on all of the places I've already talked about, including in Wisconsin, the ThinkWater page in the WGEO group, so you can access that and share it with other folks as well. All right. With that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to join me. And again, if you have any interest in any of this, I'm happy to work with you more directly, one-on-one. I can, set something up with you individually, or if you want to organize a workshop at your site or in your program, we can do that. But have a good rest of the day. Take care.